The infestation. I found the first one on a Tuesday morning, suspended from my bathroom mirror by a strand of silk, so fine it was nearly invisible. A small house spider, no bigger than a peppercorn, its body a matte black that seemed to absorb the fluorescent light above my sink. Nothing unusual about it, nothing that would have made me pause if not for the way it hung there, perfectly still, as if it had been waiting for me to notice it. I flicked it away with a tissue and thought nothing more of it. My house is old, built in 1923, according to the realtor who sold it to me 3 years ago. The kind of Philadelphia row house where the floors creak in a specific pattern when you walk from the kitchen to the stairs, where the radiators clank like chains in winter, where small creatures find their way inside through cracks and crevices that have existed longer than I've been alive. I've made peace with the occasional mouse, the stray beetle, the daddy longlegs that sometimes emerge from the basement laundry room like scouts from an underground army. But this felt different somehow. Maybe it was the way the spider had positioned itself directly in my line of sight, or the fact that it hadn't moved when I had turned on the light. Most spiders scatter when disturbed. This one had simply waited. I went about my morning routine, shower, coffee, the usual ritual of preparing for another day at the accounting firm where I've worked for the past 5 years. The kind of job that pays well enough to afford a house like this, but leaves you with the nagging feeling that you're slowly disappearing into spreadsheets and quarterly reports. The second spider appeared on Thursday. I was reaching for my coffee mug when I saw it, another small black spider, this one crawling along the rim of my ceramic mug. For a moment I thought it might be the same one from the bathroom, somehow having made its way to my kitchen. But that was impossible. I'd flushed the first one down the drain, watched it spiral away into the Philadelphia sewer system. This one moved differently too. Where the first had been perfectly still, this one traced the circumference of my mug with mechanical precision, its 8 legs moving in a rhythm that seemed almost hypnotic. I watched it complete 2 full circuits before grabbing a paper towel and brushing it away. Just coincidence, I told myself, pouring fresh coffee into a different mug. Old house, autumn weather, they're probably coming in from the cold. But as I sat at my kitchen table, sipping my coffee and reading the morning news on my phone, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The sensation was subtle at first, like the awareness you get when someone is staring at you from across a room. I found myself glancing at the corners of my kitchen, checking the spaces where the walls met the ceiling, looking for movement in my peripheral vision. Nothing. Work provided a welcome distraction. I spent the day buried in tax documents, my mind focused on numbers and deductions, the comfortable tedium of other people's financial lives. It wasn't until I was packing up to leave that I noticed the spider on my computer keyboard. It sat on the space bar, motionless, as if it had been there all day. Another small black spider, identical to the others. I stared at it for a long moment, my finger hovering over the power button of my laptop. The spider didn't move. It simply sat there, waiting. "Excuse me," I said to my cubicle neighbor, Janet, who was gathering her own things to leave. "Do you see anything on my keyboard?" She leaned over and peered at my desk. "Like what?" "A spider, right there on the space bar." Janet squinted and shook her head. "I don't see anything. Are you feeling okay? You look tired." I looked back at my keyboard. The spider was gone. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed listening to the familiar sounds of my house, the settling of old wood, the hum of the refrigerator, the occasional car passing on the street outside. But underneath these normal noises, I became aware of something else, a soft scratching sound, so faint I might have imagined it, coming from inside my walls. I told myself it was mice. Old houses always had mice, but mice scurried. They moved in short, frantic bursts. This sound was different, more deliberate, more organized, like tiny fingers tapping against the inside of the drywall. Friday morning brought rain, the kind of steady October drizzle that makes everything look gray and lifeless. I found the third spider in my shower, hanging from the shower head by a thread of silk that sparkled with water droplets. This one was slightly larger than the others, its body perhaps the size of a small button, its legs more defined. I turned the water on full blast, hoping to wash it away, but the spider simply swayed in the spray, its grip on the silk thread apparently unbreakable. I watched it for several minutes, mesmerized by its persistence, before finally reaching up to knock it loose with my shampoo bottle. The spider fell to the shower floor, and I expected to see it wash down the drain. Instead, it righted itself immediately and began climbing back up the wall, moving with the same mechanical precision I'd noticed in the others. I grabbed my body wash and squeezed a stream directly onto it, watching the soap foam around its small body. The spider continued climbing. I spent the rest of my shower keeping one eye on that corner of the stall, but the spider seemed content to stay where it was, about 3 feet up the wall, perfectly still once again. When I finished washing, I wrapped myself in a towel and hurried out, leaving the spider to its vigil. At work, I found myself researching spider behavior on my computer. I learned that most house spiders are solitary creatures, that they typically avoid human contact, that they're actually beneficial because they eat other insects. Nothing I read explained why I was suddenly seeing so many of them, or why they all looked identical, or why they seemed so unafraid of me. The internet offered various explanations for sudden spider appearances, seasonal changes, disrupted habitats, the presence of other insects they might be hunting. But none of these explanations felt right. These spiders weren't hunting. They weren't building webs. They were simply there, watching, waiting. I decided to call an exterminator. "How many are we talking about?" asked the man who answered the phone at Philly Pest Control. "Just a few," I said, "but they're persistent. They don't seem afraid of me." "Well, this is the time of year they come inside, you know, looking for warmth. We can schedule a treatment for next week." Next week felt like an eternity. That night, I checked every corner of my house before going to bed, looking for signs of spiders. I found 2 more. One in my living room, sitting on the arm of my couch, and another in my bedroom, positioned directly above my pillow. I killed them both with a rolled-up magazine, but their deaths felt hollow somehow. The way they crumpled when I hit them seemed too easy, too clean. And both times I could have sworn I heard a sound when they died, not the expected splat or crunch, but something like a whisper, like air being slowly released from a tiny balloon. That night, the scratching in my walls grew louder. I pressed my ear to the plaster and could hear it clearly. Dozens of tiny feet moving in coordinated patterns, following the electrical wiring, spreading through my house like a circulatory system. The sound was hypnotic, almost musical in its rhythm. I found myself listening to it for hours, trying to decode its pattern, to understand what it meant. There was a purpose to it, a sense of organization that reminded me of something I couldn't quite place. It wasn't until I was drifting off to sleep that I realized what it reminded me of. The sound of typing on a keyboard, thousands of invisible fingers tapping out a message I couldn't read. Saturday morning I woke to find my coffee mug filled with spiders. Not just one or two, but dozens of them, their small black bodies covering the bottom of the ceramic like grounds in an unfiltered cup. They weren't moving. They were simply there, waiting, as if they had convened a meeting in my kitchen overnight. I stood at my counter for a long time, staring at them, trying to understand what I was seeing. The logical part of my brain insisted this was impossible. Spiders didn't gather like this. They didn't coordinate their movements. They certainly didn't choose to congregate in someone's coffee mug. But there they were. I poured the entire contents of the mug into the sink and turned on the garbage disposal. The grinding sound was deafening, and I watched as the spiders disappeared into the drain, one by one. When the disposal stopped, I ran water for several minutes, then bleach, then more water. The scratching in my walls had stopped. For the first time in days, my house was completely quiet. I made coffee in a different mug and sat at my kitchen table trying to convince myself that I'd imagined the whole thing. Stress, maybe. Too much work, too much isolation. The mind could play tricks when it was pushed too hard. But when I looked up from my coffee, I saw them. They covered my kitchen window like a living curtain, their bodies pressed against the glass from the outside. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, all identical in size and color, all perfectly still. They had arranged themselves in a pattern that took me several moments to recognize, a perfect spiral, with the largest concentration at the center, tapering outward in concentric circles. I walked slowly to the window, my coffee mug trembling in my hands. The spiders didn't move as I approached. They simply waited, their multiple eyes reflecting the morning light like tiny black mirrors. And then I saw what was beyond them. My neighbor's house, the Victorian mansion that had been empty for months, was covered in the same living carpet of spiders. They clung to the siding, the windows, the roof, creating a writhing shadow that seemed to pulse with its own rhythm. The entire structure looked like it was breathing. I backed away from the window, my heart pounding. The spiders on my glass began to move, not dispersing, but rearranging themselves, their spiral pattern shifting into something that looked almost like writing. Symbols I couldn't read, in a language I didn't recognize. The scratching in my walls began again, louder now, more insistent. It was coming from everywhere at once, the ceiling, the floor, the walls around me, the sound of countless tiny feet all moving in perfect synchronization, all converging on my kitchen. I ran to my front door, but when I grasped the handle, I felt something give way under my fingers. The metal was covered in silk, fine strands that stuck to my skin like glue. The silk was warm, almost body temperature, and it pulsed with a rhythm that matched my heartbeat. The entire door frame was wrapped in webbing, delicate patterns that extended up the wall and across the ceiling. How had I not noticed it before? The silk was so fine it was nearly invisible unless you were looking directly at it. But now that I saw it, I could see it everywhere. My house was wrapped in a cocoon. I pulled my hands away from the door and stumbled backward, silk trailing from my fingers. The scratching sound was getting closer, and I could hear something else now, a rustling like leaves in wind coming from the walls themselves. The first spider emerged from a crack in my living room wall, squeezing through a gap I'd never noticed before. It was larger than the others, the size of a silver dollar, its body swollen and glossy. It was followed by another, then another, until a steady stream of spiders was pouring from the opening. They didn't scatter or run. They formed a line, marching across my floor with military precision, heading directly toward me. More cracks appeared in my walls, and more spiders emerged, all moving with the same purposeful stride. I backed toward the stairs, but when I turned to run, I saw that the steps were already covered. Spiders lined the banister, the handrail, each step, creating a carpet of black bodies that seemed to undulate in the dim light. The largest spider, the one that had emerged first, stopped about 3 feet from where I stood. It raised its front legs and made a sound I'd never heard before, a chittering that seemed to come from deep in its thorax. The sound was answered by hundreds of others, creating a symphony of alien communication that filled my house. And then, impossibly, it spoke. Not in words, but directly into my mind, its voice like silk brushing against my thoughts. "We've been trying to reach you." I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything but stand there listening to this creature speak in my head, but my body wouldn't obey. I could only watch as more spiders emerged from the walls, the ceiling, the floor itself, until my living room was filled with a sea of black bodies. "We've been preparing your house," the voice continued, "making it ready. There's so much room in the walls, so much space for all of us." I found my voice then, though it came out as barely a whisper. "What do you want?" The spider's multiple eyes fixed on me, and I could see intelligence there, ancient and patient. "We want to live. We want to grow. We want to spread." The house next door was the beginning. The family there welcomed us eventually, as you will welcome us. I thought of my neighbors, the Victorian mansion that had been empty for months. Had it really been empty? Or had it been full of something else, something that had been waiting for the right moment to expand? "You can't force me," I said, though even as the words left my mouth, I knew they were meaningless. The spider made that chittering sound again, and I realized it was laughing. "Force? We don't need to force anything. Look around you." I did look, and I saw that the spiders weren't just covering my floors and walls, they were reorganizing my space. Some were spinning webs in the corners, creating intricate patterns that seemed no obvious purpose. Others were exploring, mapping the layout of my home, disappearing into vents and coming out of electrical outlets. "We're not destroying your house," the voice explained. "We're improving it, making it more efficient, more connected." Connected to what? To the others. The house next door is just the beginning. We've been spreading for months, moving from home to home, building a network. Your house is the next node in our web. I realized then that the scratching I'd been hearing wasn't random. It was construction. The spiders had been hollowing out my walls, creating tunnels and passages that connected my house to the ones around it. They were building a colony, and I was its newest addition.